Our second speaker is Fred Singer, who is the one, I checked the biographies of all of the speakers, he's got the longest one. And, and Fred is an atmospheric and space physicist, and he's the founder and president of the Science and Environmental Policy Project. He's also distinguished research professor at George Mason University and is professor emeritus of environmental science at the University of Virginia. He recently co-authored with Dennis Avery Unstoppable Global Warming 1500 Years. His previous book include The Greenhouse Debate Continued, an analysis and critique of the IPCC climate assessment, then Climate Policy from Rio to Kyoto, which is, I think, an explanation of the decline of Western civilization, and Hot Talk, Cold Science, which he wrote in 1997. Singer, in his previous life, Singer has been a pioneer in many ways. He participated in the first experiments using high-altitude research rockets. He measured the energy spectrum of primary cosmic rays, which I confess I do not know what they are, and the distribution of stratospheric ozone. He published the first studies on subatomic particles trapped in the Earth's magnetic field, and he was the first to make the correct calculation for using atomic clocks in orbit. He designed satellites and instrumentations for remote sensing of the atmosphere, and he received a White House presidential commendation for his work. He also has held a wide range of science positions with the US government, including first director of the National Weather Satellite Service. He is the editor of Nature, Not Human Activity, Rules the Climate, which is the first report from the non-governmental international panel on climate change, which he is going to present right now. But first and foremost, he's Fred Singer. So Fred, you've got the floor. Thank you.
First, a small correction. This is what I'm going to present now. The thing that's been distributed is going to be presented at noon. I hope you'll all come and have lunch. I suppose next to food, the most important item for humans is energy. And I want to discuss with you how the unreasonable, irrational fear of global warming is screwing up our energy policy. I'll leave it to you to decide what to do about it. It has to do with affecting politicians, not my department. Energy independence is a holy grail. I don't think we can reach it. I don't think it's necessary, but I think we should move in that direction if we can. And I'd like to tell you what is standing in the way. A number of unjustified fears, of which global warming has become the most important. The others are nuclear radiation, the fear of nuclear radiation, which in many countries, including the United States, is leading to the avoidance of nuclear power, but not in France, not in Belgium, not in Japan. And the fear of oil embargoes or running out of oil, or all kinds of oil problems, which are not really of significance. We need to overcome these fears, and I want to talk particularly about the fear of global warming. The key question in all of this, and I'll be talking about it at lunch in some detail, is global warming natural or man-made? That is the issue. Everything else is, as they say, is commentary. That's the issue to address. It's a difficult problem. It's a scientific problem. How can we tell by looking at thermometers if the warming is natural and therefore unstoppable, or if it's man-made and perhaps something could be done? At least some people believe this. Here we find that the NIPCC, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, the report that I'll be discussing at lunch, is in direct contradiction to the IPCC. We believe it is natural, and we'll give you the evidence in about 2 hours. And the IPCC thinks it's man-made, and they have no evidence to back this up. And we have evidence against it, which I will show you and hope to convince you of, as I say, in about 2 hours. Well, if it is natural, as I believe it is, and Dennis, of course, agrees because we've co-authored a book on this, if it is natural and unstoppable, we have 2 further questions to answer. What are the natural causes? What are they likely to be? And why do greenhouse models predict major warming and we don't see it from greenhouse effects? So that has to be explained. On the other hand, if it were mainly anthropogenic, that is, man-made, we need to ask how effective is mitigation? And you've heard already from Dennis that biofuels are not the answer. In fact, they probably generate more carbon dioxide than they save, as has just been discussed in 2 papers in Science magazine. And then the question is, why mitigate at all? A warmer climate is better than a colder climate, something people tend to overlook. But all historic evidence points in that direction. So how do we know that anthropogenic global warming is a minor contribution and not significant? How can we tell? It works as follows. Forcing by greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, produces a characteristic pattern of warming, a unique pattern which no other forcing produces, which I'll show you again in about 2 hours. We can call it a fingerprint. It's a fingerprint. It is characteristic of greenhouse gases, a pattern of warming produced by greenhouse gases. But the climate data don't show this fingerprint. They don't match. And if the fingerprints don't match, it means that greenhouse gases do not contribute significantly to global warming. And what do the opponents respond? I'll talk about it a little more later. They say, well, maybe there's something wrong with the data. We don't make up our own data. We use the best data available in published reports, including the reports of the IPCC. We have compared the data and the models, and if you were sitting in another session now, you would hear a paper presented by my co-author, David Douglas, from the University of Rochester. We've just published this paper last December in the International Journal of Climatology, which is a journal of the Royal Meteorological Society. David had a hell of a time getting it through the referees. They didn't like the conclusion. They couldn't object to what we did, but they didn't like the conclusion, which is that the models, the greenhouse models, disagree with the observations. John Christie, our other co-author, explained why the models overestimate greenhouse warming. And my contribution is to explain how solar activity controls the climate. So in summary, we don't see any firm evidence in support of man-made global warming. On the contrary, the evidence we produce in this paper, which looks like this, contradicts the IPCC. It is evidence against any man-made global warming, or any significant man-made global warming. Mind you, we do believe that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We do accept the fact that it is increasing. All we say is that the effect is smaller, a great deal smaller than what climate models predict. That's what we see in the data. Now, just a few words about rational energy policy. Once you accept the fact that global warming is natural and not man-made, then any discussion of carbon dioxide as a pollutant is pointless. It isn't. It has insignificant effects on the climate. That's what we've demonstrated in this publication. This means that all of the energy policies that are now designed to reduce the emission of CO2 are pointless. This means that, for example, use of natural gas to generate electricity is a waste. It has raised the price of natural gas by a factor of 4, from $2 a million BTU to $8 a million BTU. It is making it difficult for industries to make fertilizer, plastics, and homeowners who use natural gas for heating, cooking, are paying much higher prices for no good reason. So we should phase out natural gas for electricity production and use coal or nuclear. We have lots of coal in the United States, in Australia, South Africa, in many places around the world, in Russia. Coal is everywhere. It's a plentiful fuel, and it's a good fuel, and it can be burned cleanly thanks to pollution control equipment. We know how to do that. In fact, we have to do that because it's required by law. You have to burn coal in a clean way without emitting pollutants that can damage human health. So there's no problem with coal. And it's cheap. It's about 1/4 the price of natural gas. It's about the same price as nuclear, depending on local circumstances. In some places, nuclear is preferable. In many places, coal is preferable. Depends on transportation costs and other things. What do we do with the gas that's been saved, the natural gas, the methane? Well, you can use it for transportation. In my hometown in Washington, D.C., all the buses now run on clean natural gas instead of gasoline or diesel oil. They brag about it. Compressed natural gas is a wonderful fuel for buses, for trucks, for any fleet vehicle, taxi cabs, any fleet vehicle. It will save a lot of oil. We can reduce our import of oil by approximately 30% if we use the natural gas now used for electricity production, if we use it for transportation. And the other thing we need in a rational energy policy is access. There's a lot of oil available in the world. There's a lot of oil available in the United States, both onshore and particularly offshore. But you can't get to it. Why? Because the government won't permit it. Why? Because of environmental pressures. Yet we know that we can produce oil without any difficulty, without any environmental impact. The only alternative to producing oil domestically is to bring it in by tankers. So I ask you, which is safer, tankers or pipelines? I think pipelines are safer. And finally, conservation. Don't forget about energy conservation. Conservation is always a good policy because it saves money. No matter what you think about climate, no matter what you think about global warming, conservation is a good policy if it saves you money. It's a bad policy if it's forced on you. As a matter of fact, in most countries, in most industrialized countries, energy conservation has come automatically. We see it in the fact that the ratio of energy used per dollar of GNP has been decreasing. We can now run an economy more efficiently, using less energy to produce the same amount of output, the same amount of wealth. As a result of all of these policies, we can reduce oil imports. I'm not claiming that we can be independent. No, do we want to be independent? If you can buy oil cheaply in the world market, we should do that. But we can reduce the amount of oil we buy on the world market, and incidentally also reduce the world price of oil at the same time because of reduced demand. Just briefly, what are the obstacles to energy independence? These are what I call the detour. The first was the road to energy independence. This is the detour. These are all policies now currently advocated in many countries, including the United States and most European countries. Well, one of them is so-called alternative energy sources, like wind, solar, and ocean. Okay, I don't know what to say about this. They're clearly uneconomic, have to be subsidized, they're unsteady, they're not likely to produce a lot of energy. In any case, they don't produce transportation fuel, so they don't help you very much towards energy independence. They produce a little bit of electricity, which can be much easier and cheaper produced by coal or nuclear. One coal plant, one nuclear plant can equal the output of 20,000 wind turbines. Need I say more? And they're just as safe. 2 wind turbines just blew up last month in Denmark, nearly killing people if they had been around. These are dangerous gadgets, nothing to play with. They now want to institute, I understand, in Denmark and other places in Europe, a 400-meter zone around each windmill to make sure that when the blades fly off, they don't kill people. Next, we have a policy called cap and trade. That's the favorite policy now in the US Congress. It's costly, it's unhelpful, it's unnecessary. What else can I say against it? Except that every presidential candidate now running is for it. Carbon capture, so-called sequestration, is probably the worst of all policies. It's not only uneconomic, it goes against conservation. It uses up half the power generated by electricity plants. Half the power. It means you have to build 2 plants to have the same amount of electric output. Biofuels, I think Dennis has said all that needs to be said about biofuels. They're bad. They're uneconomic, and they only exist because they have subsidies and tax breaks, because there's some people who make money out of it, and we're all paying for it. What is the only kind thing I can say about biofuels? Polar bears are unaffected by the production of ethanol. They don't care. Other wildlife is in danger, as Dennis has pointed out. Polar bears don't mind. Polar bears don't vote. Finally, CAFE, the automobile efficiency standards, a subject of great debate now in Europe between the EU, the European Union, and particularly Germany. Hybrids, electric cars will take care of the problem. Anything that is now being applied or advocated are what I call Band-Aids. These are small things that will waste resources. All we need is a better battery. Once better electric batteries are built, we will have electric cars at lower cost. Okay, once we conclude that human-produced greenhouse gases are not responsible for global warming, all these schemes that I've just described, these detours, are ineffective, pointless, but very costly. Any attempt to cap CO2 emissions, misguided, any ambitious program to reduce CO2 emissions a complete waste of time and not needed. In the United States, we have the EPA, our environmental agency. They can now deny in good conscience the request by California, by the governor of California, Schwarzenegger, for a waiver on automobile efficiency standards. We can now respond properly to the Supreme Court that has ruled that CO2 is a pollutant. And we can conduct negotiations on Middle East issues, political negotiations, in a different dimension. Once we use less oil and we understand better that that is not a problem. So once we get rid of climate fears, we can have a more rational energy policy, not only in the United States, but everywhere, leading to less dependence on oil and gas imports. Thank you.